My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today, we're talking with Tina Mary of Simply Sweet Games, which was founded in 2023. Tina has worked previously at King and EA and spent the last few years working as a consultant specializing in cultural intelligence. We talk a lot about her journey of bootstrapping a studio after finding the right co-founder, in part through her consulting work, and recently launching their first title onto mobile markets and what she's learned about herself along this journey. I really enjoyed my time with Tina and hope you'll find her reflections insightful. Let's jump in. The place I always like to start the conversation is the way I sort of describe it for myself was there was a moment where it went from the idea of, I think I'm going to start a studio to, no, I'm emotionally and mentally committed to starting a studio. And now it's just about making that happen. And I'm curious for you, what was that tipping point? Like what led up to the idea of founding Simply Sweet Games and then pushed you over into like, no, I'm absolutely going to do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love this. I was consulting. I was working in the consultancy space, specializing in cultural inclusion and cultural intelligence when this happened. And I met Karina Kahn, my co-founder, in person. We were both speakers at GDC 23. And we had met in person previously virtually through philanthropy work. So very nice to meet her in person. And we kept meeting at speaker parties and we started sharing stories and realizing, although we'd been in the games industry for a similar amount of time, we just had such very different journeys, although similar lessons learned, similar observations. We started understanding a very common set of values and a sense of maybe an opportunity started to formulate in our brain, but it wasn't for a number of months later. We kept talking and Karina stepped away from the founding group that she was with, a Web3 group. We talked a few more times and I don't know what the tipping point was, to be honest. It was just these ongoing conversations and understanding of value alignment. And at some point, we talk about this and neither one of us is quite positive who said it first, but one of us at one point said, I'm all in if you're all in. And the other one said, I'm all in. And we realized, we need to do something. And that's when we decided it was time to form a studio and started on the mission of creating the Simply Sweet Games brand.
When, often founding a studio is definitely an all-in proposition, but as you sort of said, okay, no, I'm all in. What did that really sort of come to mean in that starting day? Like what were the things you had to figure out and sort of realize, oh, if I'm all in, it means I have to figure out X, Y, and Z and learn all these things to go and go on this journey?
Yeah, we had to start with as simple as a company name, right? How do we identify ourselves as a brand? What was our brand name going to be? And there was some conversation of leveraging a previous brand that Karina had worked under, decided, no, we wanted to really start fresh. So getting, understanding, but even to get to a company name, we had to be really clear on our mission. Like, what are we trying to do? Why are we doing this? What's our goal? And so we had to start with that, sort of begin with the end in mind of where are we going? Why are we doing this? And that helped us reach the conclusion for the company name. As an example, Simply Sweet Games. It had a sort of a bit of a double entendre for us, the sweet as in sweet and beautiful and lovely and cozy kind of games that we want to build, but also kind of sweet, cool, a little bit edgy maybe. And we feel that really epitomizes who we are as individuals. And then related to that, it was sort of early skepticism on our desire to focus on premium casual games. As I'm sure your audience knows, casual games are predominantly free to play, right? Especially in the mobile space. And after a lot of research and soul playing about who we wanted to be and our mission as a studio, we realized we really wanted to focus on premium versus free to play, and that would be the right focus for us. But it was a process of getting to that clear commitment in our own minds and battling a bit of skepticism from others.
I think a lot of founders start at different places on that journey based on how they come to that moment of founding. But values alignment and how do you express that values alignment and that vision of values through your brand, your company name, how you operate, your culture, that kind of stuff, is something that I've heard a few founders talk about.
Mm-hmm.
When you sort of reflect on those early days of I've made this commitment, I'm all in, and now we're figuring out these early parts of starting a studio. What would you sort of like if you met, you know, a version of you now who's like at that same moment of they're like, I think I'm all in and I think I want to start a studio. What would you sort of say like, okay, you're at this moment. Here's the learnings I would pass along to you of if you're all in, here's some free lessons of what you should do next.
Mm-hmm. There's so many of them, Carl. I think I'm going to boil it down to one really important one, and maybe we can go deeper if you'd like. But going back to that idea of begin with the end in mind, right? Really focusing on where do we want to be as a studio, as a team, as a business? Why are we doing this? So let's start with the why. You got to start with that, answering that big why question. And then truly, as you begin with that end in mind, and you want to really constantly keep it on the radar to inform the decisions, to filter the decisions, because everything you do, every decision you reach, when should we incorporate? Should we have a founder's agreement? Should I have a co-founder? How will we get funding? What funding should we pursue? Why will we pursue funding? What games should we build? Why should we build them? Who are our audiences? Every single one of those questions needs to be filtered or should be filtered on the begin with the end in mind. So that's my single biggest piece of advice. Spend as much time as it takes answering that question before you even move forward with anything else, because otherwise you're going to waste time, money, energy, everything else, kind of spinning wheels unnecessarily.
Absolutely. And I think, another piece that I have experienced is so many of those questions, as you think you've answered one, you encounter the next, and that actually changes your answer to
Right?
the previous, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's almost less about answering any of one of those questions once and answering all of them in sequence repeatedly as the answers continually update.
Yeah, iterative.
But I'd love to go just a little bit deeper because I think there's a lot of material out there when people are talking about being a founders, especially with the prevalence of narratives that come out of things like tech startups and Silicon Valley, where begin with the end in mind, people might hear that and jump to like, oh, well, now I need to think about what exit do I want, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
do I want to be acquired or do I want to IPO or whatever? And I'm pretty sure that's not what you mean. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about like how you frame that question and how you would challenge someone to think through it and work through what they really want the end in order to reflect on what the beginning should be.
Right? Yeah, agree. I love this question because you're right. I think that some people might misunderstand it as what is the exit strategy? And that's absolutely one of the questions we need to explore, right? If we're going to go seek funding, this is part of our conversation today. How do we make sure the people who are funding us actually get a return on their investment unless they're just doing it for the good of their heart? Right. And even people who are doing it for the best intentions and want to make an impact investment, they probably want at least their money back anyway. So we do need to concern ourselves with these conversations. But you're right. That wasn't quite what I meant. For example, we started out thinking we would maybe want to be a studio of maybe 100 or 200 people. And we've quickly readjusted our mindset as we've seen the challenge in the industry with the AAA model, with the even the mid-sized teams just struggling and studios getting shut down. We thought, no, I have deep subject matter expertise working with global and distributed teams. We need to lean into that. We need to stay lean and efficient and just get to market fast with a smaller team. So that was an evolution for us, but it's a decision you have to make early on. What does an ideal team makeup? What does a growth plan look like for us? Again, that beginning with the end in mind. Well, okay, if I want to be there, and if 5 years from now success looks like we're going to have an exit, and we can define what that exit looks like, I'm going to be retired and rich, or 10 years or whatever, then what are the things that have to happen before that? So I kind of step myself backwards and I say, well, if I have to achieve that by that date, then we probably have to have shipped a product by a year or two in. And if we're going to ship a product by a year or two in, then we kind of probably need to bring a prototype to GDC. So for example, for us, we got clear on our mission of the kinds of games we were building and our core audience. We understood a gap in the market related to women building games for women. We understood that casual games are a dominant opportunity there. And we got hyper focused on word puzzle games because we knew we could build something quick, a proof of concept quickly, and then it was a core demographic being underrepresented in the industry. So focusing on that, putting our money where our mouth was, hiring a strong engineer who could quickly get us a strong technical prototype, helped get us to clearly validating our mission and our intentions related to that first debut product. I hope I'm answering your questions.
Yes, absolutely.
This is the kind of stuff that I think about. We also had to go through the thought process of, well, I have a co-founder. I've mentioned this, Karina Kahn, my amazing business partner. And Karina and I had to make decisions around incorporation. So we quickly decided it was beneficial to incorporate, and to save money, I self-incorporated. Later on, we realized we needed a founder's agreement because we wanted to start raising money. And once you raise money, you need a founder's agreement, a way to disagree gracefully. And we'll talk some more about this later. But that we engaged a lawyer for that, to make sure he's tied up our incorporation paperwork, made sure I had done it properly, and got our founder's agreement in place. So deciding when and why you do those things, doing that, what did it unlock for us? Initially, incorporating, as an example, unlocked an opportunity with Trade Commission Canada, where they reached out and said, would you like to be part of the delegation going to GDC 24? I said, yes, please. I put up my hand. And we said, okay, well, we need a business plan. Oh my God, okay, now we need to scramble and create a business plan. So we quickly we created a business plan to go with that incorporation. We made sure we had a logo. We had a terrible logo initially. And then I hired somebody to create a wonderful logo for us. I really love our logo now. But our first one was AI generated, Tina and Karina playing, not in our wheelhouse. And so we had so many things to figure out. It never ends, does it, Carl?
No, but I mean, I think, there's an important sort of realization is the wrong term, maybe reflection on how your journey went, which is, there are a lot of things that you can do as you begin the journey. But to your point, looking at what is the end goal, what are the steps that help get us there, will put pressure on doing the right things sort of just in time.
Exactly.
And to your point, like, incorporating early was important because it opens up a lot of opportunities, especially I am happy to say here in BC and Canada, where there's a lot of benefits to being an incorporated company, especially in video games and different sources of grants and tax credits and all this kind of stuff you can go to. And so doing that early makes a ton of sense. But to your point, you didn't need to generate a whole business plan ahead of time. You just had to do it just in time for that opportunity, right?
Exactly.
And so finding, like, I think part of what I'm sort of really appreciating about your story is that idea of, like, have an end goal in mind that helps prioritize decisions and try to do things just in time, not endlessly prepare ahead of time for things that you won't need for months and months and months and months.
Yeah, because you just won't have time to do them, right?
Yeah, startup
to-do list.
Yeah. Startup life is definitely all about the opportunity costs and ruthless prioritization.
Exactly. I love that. Ruthless prioritization. That is me. I'm a list lady. What's the top of the list right now?
So we've talked about your co-founder a bit and how you met Karina and came to go on a journey together. I'm curious, like, as you think about you two as co-founders, how would you describe sort of that makeup and mix? I think a lot of people often sort of default to language that's like, I have the tech co-founder and the design co-founder, or the business co-founder, or the art co-founder, right? But often what's most important about that co-founder makeup is less about the discipline they come from and more about how strengths and weaknesses merge and meld and life perspectives and all this kind of stuff. And so when you think about your co-founder relationship with Karina, what is that makeup? How do you guys balance each other out and each bring something to the table that makes it stronger as a whole?
Yeah. I want to start this answering this question by saying Karina makes me better every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's really wonderful that I think we push each other in really positive ways to learn and grow. And I am a lifelong learner. We are a generation apart. She's the same age as my eldest daughter. And so she started in the games industry at 19, had a very diverse range of early experiences. She even worked with Brenda Bailey, who's, of course, our current finance minister in British Columbia, but at the time was co-founder of a very early female-founded gaming startup, Silicon Sisters. There's not too many of them out there in those days. She's worked with indie studios, AAA, supports live ops, done nonprofit work. And her passion really shows up in the creative, right? So she came to the studio with a passion to really work on product and take her work that she'd done some work in production and creative, but really focus on the creative. So as chief product officer, but also our executive producer, she has to wear two really big hats, both executing on the game and trying to derive the vision, which is amazing. Karina also came to Canada as an immigrant. So she grew up in South Africa. So a really interesting experience, didn't come to Canada until she was 10. So has this really diverse range of experiences. I'm a first generation Canadian. My parents were Europeans. And I didn't join the industry till I was 39 years old. Like I was constantly facing credibility issues. I'd done a lot of cool stuff. I was at an intermediate management level, like a development director level when I joined the industry in 2003. But people were like, well, so what games have you shipped? What have you done? Why are you in this industry? And I grew to love the industry. I spent 14 years at EA. I ran global franchises and I focused on the execution, project planning, people, talent, really helping people create the best out of what they can. I was less on the creative and more on the execution business. And I think that's where our dynamic works really well. My voice counts for the creative. Karina's voice counts for the business, but we know our swimming lanes. We try to really keep in our own lanes as much as possible. And the other thing is cultural value differences. So I'm, as I mentioned, a subject matter expert in the field of cultural intelligence. And one of the lenses by which we understand diversity in teams, either diverse, local homogenous, what we think are homogenous teams, two women working together, or global teams, diversity shows up. And for Karina and I, one example of that is a value called how we think about doing things, monochronic or polychronic. Now, as CEO who has to handle a lot of different things and respond to a lot of different emergent tasks, it's a good thing I'm polychronic because that means I don't mind multitasking. I don't mind this blurring of work and home life. And I'm pretty cool with that. There's an opportunity cost. You used that term earlier for me, context switching, but it's probably of cultural value that my role as CEO benefits by having. Karina, on the other hand, is monochronic. She thrives on getting one thing done at a time. Try not to interrupt her. So the way we work together and schedule things, we try to reflect and be respectful of each other's needs in that regard. But I think that difference in cultural value actually creates a positive dynamic for us in terms of outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I always find that like where those working styles, strengths, and not weaknesses, but differences of where and how effort can best be applied by individuals, like finding the places where those are uh like not the I'm blanking on the word, but like not the same, but like really beneficial to each other,
Mm-hmm.
where you can take on a bunch of that stuff, and that as Karina works, she'll just like chew through the list one thing at a time, and you can really rely on that, and that becomes a difference that you rely on and you feel stronger as a team because of.
Exactly. We explore those cultural values a lot as a team and as co-founders to understand how do we leverage our similarities and differences.
You mentioned the long set of conversations and sort of like not even really exploring founding something beginning with, but sort of just being around and building community with each other as you went along. But in retrospect, looking back now, what were the most important conversations for you to be like, no, this is the right person to be on this co-founding team?
Mm. It was about exploring some of this stuff we've been seeing going on in the industry, and our own personal experiences, I think, was really, I started to very much understand that we had seen and experienced similar things. We had a lot of value alignment around inclusion. We feel strongly that the conversation around inclusion isn't just about gender. There's so much more to it than that, and that we thought we could make a difference. And I came from AAA space where, we were running sport. I was running sports franchises like FIFA, where we had to be very predictable, high quality, but ship games on time, by the minute, by the hour, or millions of dollars were on the stake. So I had to be very predictable in my processes. Karina came a lot of indie. So we're trying to come together and understand, do they work together? And actually, I reached a point where I said, agile predictability, that's what I think comes when we bring these things together. This ability to understand how to flex and do something with very little, but also to create a predictable, positive, sustainable business framework. So understanding that we were so aligned in how we saw the industry and what was possible in terms of how we could personally bring our skills and potentially make a difference for others in the industry. As I realized that, it was obvious that we wanted to do something together. And then we got braver about, let's start a business.
Yes. Yes. I'm curious how you guys have, you've been at this for a little bit. How have you guys come to understand best how you guys make decisions and have disagreements, as like will invariably come up, right? Like you mentioned earlier a little bit of, there is some amount of each focusing on a very specific lane within how you guys hold the business as a whole up together. Each of you has an element that you're sort of like keeping your eye on, and that the other is keeping an eye on another part. But I imagine that there's always going to be opinions on both sides and decisions you want to come together to make, places where you may want to work through how you're seeing the world differently. And so I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you have come to sort of build those muscles with Karina, and how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if we don't start with mutual respect, this is hard to build that muscle in the first place, right? And I think we started at a place where we really deeply respected each other's skills, experience, and perspective. So that really helped. The founders agreement helps create a legal foundation for, if we disagree, what can we do? And it's kind of like being married, I was with my husband for almost 7 years before we got married, and you would have thought, oh, it doesn't make a difference, but it did. It felt like we were slightly more committed after marriage than before. And I think that's what the founders agreement does a little bit of. It's like, okay, well, if it gets really hard, we know that there's going to be something to help support us in the background, like a really good, strong framework. So that was a good starting place. But we strive really hard to be very collaborative and transparent with each other about why we want to make a certain decision. So when we do disagree, like Karina will make a proposal that I disagree with, or I will make one she will disagree with. First of all, it's creating a safe place to say, I don't agree with you. And that's critical, that we've gotten to a place in our relationship and in our team where we can all feel like, I can say, I call bullshit, sorry. Excuse my language. But then it's getting to the why. Why do you think that decision is wrong, or why are you taking that position? And so being patient enough with each other, because sometimes the why isn't that clear and easy to articulate, right? It's hard to get to it, or it's hard to communicate it. So being okay with, I get you don't get it, so let's talk some more. We do a lot of work on Teams and texting and chatting because we're a remote team. So quickly get on a call. Let's cut to the chase here. Let's get clear on what we're trying to say, because obviously we're not communicating in written words properly. So, but yes, I think that fundamentally the best way that we stay in our swimming lanes as much as possible. But when it comes to big decisions, it's very collaborative, respectful of each other's opinions, and being okay that sometimes we agree to disagree. That's going to happen sometimes too, right? And you have to decide, okay, we're going to agree to disagree, but who's going to make the final decision? If it's product, it's going to be Karina. If it's business, it's going to be Tina.
So, jumping a little bit to every founder's favorite topic, which is fundraising, could you tell us a little bit about how you're funded in whatever detail you feel comfortable sharing?
Sure, absolutely. We are pretty much fully bootstrapped up to this point. We have received some external and non-dilutive funding. So we have a variety of founder capital, friends and family through SAFE agreements. We've received some small investments through IRAP, including a youth that we've hired full-time for 1 year, a junior artist. We've received some funding for interns through the work placement program in collaboration with DigiBC. We've received some grants through Creative BC's Passport to Market program. We've been involved in some accelerators that have been more about leveling us up in terms of being fundable versus delivering funding. So that's been part of our funding journey too, sort of more professional development. So that's what we've done so far. Yeah.
Awesome. Could you very quickly, in case folks aren't familiar, you mentioned IRAP. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yes, IRAP is an acronym that relates to Scientific Research and Development Group. It's an innovation council and funding arm of the Government of Canada. And so once you're incorporated and reached a certain stage of maturity as a business, you can get a representative assigned to you that will help you navigate the different funding opportunities they have at your different stages of business development. So anybody who's a startup in Canada should absolutely be investigating and looking at that acronym IRAP and finding out what it has to, how they can help support you.
One of the things that we've had a couple guests on who have been in the Canadian ecosystem, and one of the things that I always like to emphasize on this, because I also enjoy being a Canadian startup, is that there are a lot of, to your point, there are a lot of ways that the Canadian government, both federally and provincially, help the startup ecosystem, and folks should definitely explore that if they're up here and hiring up here. There's a lot of different ways for them to get a leg up in this fun fundraising environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the other future looking funding opportunities we'll have that we know that are in front of us is the interactive digital media tax credit, which in British Columbia is about to move to 25% of salaries. It was 17.5. The caveat there, as an example, in our founding year, our full year of founding, we did not have the opportunity to leverage it because we weren't at minimum 100,000 in payroll.
When you think about sort of, you founded the company, I imagine like many founders, you had some idea of like, oh, well, working back from the end, if we want to get this kind of funding, we need to go to GDC, or we need to talk to this, or we need to build these prototypes. But, as things have gone on, what's the biggest difference between how you thought you would fundraise and how fundraising would go, and what's actually happened so far, and how have you had to sort of adjust your plans?
Well, how hard it was. I was very naive when we started, for sure. Even to the point where we were exploring pitching to VCs well before we should have even thought down that path. Because I can tell you right now, in today's climate, as a startup, if you're just a startup with just an idea, don't even bother thinking about knocking down the VC paths. You're wasting your time and you're wasting their time, at least in my opinion. So yeah, I think that the where to go fundraise was a journey that we had to go on. What are the opportunities for us? And it just all took so much longer. And how iterative the process is of defining your pitches and your business model, understanding, especially in games, we're pitching potentially to two very different audiences, an investor versus a publisher. Well, guess what? Conventional wisdom says you have one business pitch. In games, you have to have two at least, minimum, understanding how big the financial risk was going to become. So I didn't plan to set out to invest quite as much personally as I now have. I'm personally paying the teams salaries out of my retirement fund. So that's how committed I am. But at the beginning, I hadn't really planned for that
Mhm.
because I
Mhm.
thought that we would find funding sooner.
Yep. Yep.
And a pleasant surprise has been how many people in the community have stepped up to try and help in different ways, like massively impactful ways, beyond belief, to the point where I've definitely had to say, I can't accept free help unless I know there's a quid pro quo involved.
I think the a very consistent feeling folks have had is as they've built community within other founders and other members of the gaming space. Especially, I know that the community here in BC is very strong. They've always had a very similar sentiment of like every founder is willing to help each other out, and you can get overwhelming support on a variety of things when you have
Exactly.
built out that community.
That's the best thing about this industry, the community.
When you think about sort of this fundraising journey and all the lessons along the way and the learning as you go, what was the hardest part for you individually of that journey, right? Like what really cost you the most sort of from an emotional toll, a stress and anxiety, that kind of stuff. Like what was the hardest bit of it?
Uh, I mean, beyond being worried about the money, right? And the money is not just about me personally, but about Karina and my team and making sure that we're all taken care of. It's about, it's a lot. I'm all in. I'm working long hours. So trying to find life balance and ensuring I'm taking care of my family and myself and my health, it has been a challenge. It's been something that I have to really be intentional about. As an example, I strive not to work on weekends unless there's a very critical deadline that I'm facing. I've got a CMF submission due Monday. I'm going to do it, or prepping for a talk I deliver on a Monday or something. But I try to preserve my weekends as a minimum. You know, it's but that I think, yeah, it's just there's so much to do. I gotta just go back to my lists, be ruthless in prioritization, and then go, now enough. Line in the sand. Day's over. Right? Yeah.
That serves as a really nice transition to sort of the next area that I like to jump into and talk about with founders, which is really zooming in on your individual founding journey, right? So
Mhm.
so less about Simply Sweet Games and much more really about how you have been dealing with that exact challenge of finding your boundaries, honoring them, finding the ways to make this as sustainable as possible. And I'm curious, what do you feel like your biggest struggle is as a founder, and how have you been approaching dealing with that?
Um, it's again, it goes back to that life balance and health and wellness and personal health wellness, right? So for me individually, because I'm all in, I sometimes have to pull myself back from working too long of hours, putting too much emotional things in, um, forgetting how to achieve that proper life balance. So that's been the thing that triggers the most stress in me, because I feel life balance, the word balance is one of my core values. I feel strongly that my team deserves it, that I deserve it, that life, I believe in the yin and yang of life, so to speak, right? And I feel it. I feel really messed up when I'm not balanced, and that's been the hardest part of this journey, is because I'm not always balanced, and I know that. So I have to work really hard to try and get back in balance sometimes.
Yeah, and when you say work really hard to get back in balance, like is that always sort of a triage moment in a way, right? Like, oh, I feel it, and so I have to sort of put together whatever I can in this moment to return to balance. Or have you found that there's structures or support structures that you can build, whether those are humans or routines or whatever, to sort of try and make that return to balance something that is not a triage moment, an emergency every time, but instead something that you find more and more support for yourself.
Yeah, I'm very blessed. My husband's retired and he takes care of me. So he'll come and knock on the door to say, you've been down there a long time, or, lunch or dinner's ready. So that helps because I have a firm break. So he really helps keep me accountable. I'll be honest, though, I don't have as good a framework as I could here. I think, Carl, I think I sometimes just reach that tipping point and it shows up in reactions. And so then I have to just address them. I could be probably more proactive than I am. But there are, minute structures in my day that help. So, for example, I tend to start my day later than most. I'm not probably online till 9:30 or 10, so I'm not going to get on for 8 o'clock every day. I give myself the gift of an early morning, time in my garden, time with my cats, all that good stuff. I always take a lunch break, even if it's only half an hour, because I need food, I need to eat. So I try and put structures in my day and in the physical surroundings to also protect myself. For example, my workspace, I've got screens around me and it creates a little feeling of a work pod separate from my home pod.
You mentioned, the support structure of your husband being there to really support and remind you that the world outside of your work exists. You mentioned previously, like finding the founder community a source of support and strength and it, all that kind of stuff. Are there other sort of like support structures that less for necessarily the specific struggle of keeping a balance, but more just like the overall journey of a founder? It can be a tough one overall. It's a very fast paced, very stressful kind of calling. And so, outside of your partner and the community, what are the other sort of support structures that you find in your life that you're really glad to that are there supporting you on this founding journey?
Yeah. DigiBC is one of them. I deeply appreciate DigiBC as an organization that pulls our community together and creates opportunities for us all to connect. Even to the point where we can go use their workspace periodically to pull the team together in person. The Vancouver Founders Group, a Discord group that we're both part of, Carl, I really appreciate that group because I feel like we're all looking out for each other. Heads up on this fun, this opportunity, this cool event coming up. It just feels like a really safe, cool place to help level each other up as founders. Those are probably my two most important places for me to get leveled up outside of individual reach outs and mentorship.
Yeah, I think DigiBC is a really wonderful support here in the city that I deeply appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thinking a little bit about the future, I know you guys very recently sort of unveiled and sort of set your game off on the beginning of its journey into the world with
That's
live
right.
players and that kind of stuff. So first of all, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But when you think about the next 6 months, a year, sort of that shorter to medium term horizon, what are you thinking a lot about, both for yourself on that journey of being a founder, but also the company that is the thing that you're like, oh, I need to think about these things? Less like what keeps you up at night and more like what are you trying to proactively think about for that slightly longer term horizon?
So, Simply Sweet Games is a bit unique in that we're not trying to build a series of games. We're trying to build a game engine. And we're trying to go B2B with that approach. So, in other words, one of our strategies related to becoming a sustainable business and studio was reflecting on the challenge of creating a single hit. Right? Are we going to create the next Candy Crush? I don't know. Maybe I'll create the next Words for Friends, but maybe not. Right? Or it'll be an iterative process. Look what happened with Bellatro. That was not an overnight success. It was an iterative work with the community to go from good to great to excellent. And so we see that opportunity with our approach with Crisscross Castle. And our goal is to create a sustainable engine. So that's the business vision, is build out the tech to be able to spin off lots of different games, work with brand partners, and sell the licensed products to those companies. So we're really excited about kind of continuing to go down that R&D path of that, as well as building more more word game titles within the Crisscross Castle franchise and getting that game to a premium launch. So we got a lot of big ideas, but it all stems with this idea of the engine being an adaptive engine, white label engine.
And I always like to sort of wrap up the main long form question section of the interview with an entirely unfair question, which is given the experience thus far, if we jump forward some number of years into the future, let's not think about where Simply Sweet ended up, but you have the opportunity, you're faced with the decision of do you start another company or not? Would you go on another founding journey?
Whew. That's a really good question. It would depend on how far in the future, if I'm honest, Carl. Probably yes. Probably yes, because it's been a very positive experience and I'm a lifelong learner, but it's been a lot of work. So would I go in as a founding CEO? Might take a step back to a slightly less active role if it was, say, 10 years in the future. I would say it's kind of it depends, but probably yes. Probably yes.
Like I said, entirely unfair question, but it's always interesting to see and reflect on how much was this of a particular moment versus, to your point, it was positive and there's a lot of growth there, and so that's it, engaging enough to want to do again versus like,
Yeah.
nope, I did it, check the box, we're good.
Yeah, I'm still having fun. That's the good part. It's hard, but I'm having fun.
Absolutely. So the sort of at the end of the interviews, I like to do what I call my introspection lightning round.
Sure.
And where these questions really come from is they are actually questions that when I was seeking co-founders, or what I like to call co-founder dating, these were a series of questions that I would sort of ask really up front. And in really our first really face-to-face meeting where we would sit down and sort of talk about what it meant to be potential founders together, we would both bring answers to these questions and go through them. And so they're really sort of like baseline setting questions that are just about introspection and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they come from. And so I'll just ask them more lightning round style and get your answers.
Sure.
Close out the interview. So
Okay.
we start with, what is your superpower?
Cultural intelligence and fostering inclusion, really getting the best out of a diverse team, diverse stakeholders, supporting diverse audiences. That would be, I believe, my superpower.
Outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
The ability to multitask and juggle a lot, because I've had a lot of diverse career experiences. So I think I'm pretty good at navigating that diversity of needs that we have as a startup and as a CEO, of just tackling lots of different things that need to get done and just making sure they get done, juggling a lot.
And the flip side of that, of course, is what are your big weaknesses?
The ability to multitask and juggle a lot comes with a huge opportunity cost and sometimes a little bit of stress. It is definitely a strength and an opportunity for me.
Yes. Often I've always been amused is probably the wrong word, but sort of like I appreciate the observation and I always chuckle a little bit at it of how often someone's answer to those two pairs of questions tends to be basically like, oh, it's the same thing. It's just different sides of the coin.
Yep. Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah. What do you find your behaviors are when you are having intense stress reactions? Like, how does your behavior change when you're deeply under stress?
If I'm really very, very stressed, I will get teary. I will get emotional. Yeah, I will have a hard time thinking logically. My brain shuts down a little bit if I'm too stressed. I definitely, I think that if I'm very angry stressed, then it might show up differently. But true stress, like I'm worried about something or scared about something or feeling overwhelmed by life or what's going on around me, then it can show up in the form of frustrated tears.
And then what are the things that need to happen professionally within work on a really regular basis that help you keep from getting to that sort of overwhelmed and stressed point? I call them sort of upkeep needs.
Yeah.
but just things that you need to have happen regularly.
Yeah, that schedule I mentioned, which my husband helps me deeply with, is key for me. Because working from home does mean I need to separate home and work in a very, very, very intentional ways. And nature, I love my garden. So another way that I can even find micro moments in my day might be I'll go upstairs and I'll make a new cup of tea, and I'll walk out into the garden and go pick a few berries or grab a few weeds out of the bed, or just watch the birds for a minute and just breathe the air and feel good. So being close to nature, I think there's evidence actually psychologically that even looking at a nature picture can help improve our psychological output. But I'm grateful that I live in a rural area. I just have to look out a window.
Yeah. That's one of the nice things about being in. I know that I feel like this podcast has turned into a bit of just a advertisement for Vancouver and BC. But one of the things I deeply appreciate about BC, and I live in North Vancouver, and like I'm 5 to 10 minutes from functionally being in a forest, right? And to your point, there is a bunch of evidence that just like the smell of a forest and the sounds will immediately like help your brain calm down and be more creative and alert and all sorts of things. So
Exactly. Yeah. We're very blessed, and that's it. And you're right. The industry is doing a good job. Is the provinces and country is doing a good job of supporting game development, and the gaming industry. So I'm grateful for that. I think that's played a part in us deciding to keep going and make this happen. So
well, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast and sharing your journey. Here at the end of the interview, if there's any sort of shout outs or things you want to call out for the audience, what would you sort of leave our audience with?
I think I just want to lean into a thank you for you hosting this, Carl. I think it's a great opportunity and platform for founders to share their stories, and potential founders or other founders to learn from each other. So I really appreciate you organizing this and inviting me for this conversation. So I think that's my main message. I don't want to, I would love to have people check out what we're up to at Simply Sweet Games. You can find us at simplysweetgames.ca, and check out the project that we've got live right now, and reach out to me personally if you have any questions or want to know more about what we're doing.
Yeah, and on that point, if someone did hear something on the podcast that they're super interested in following up with you on, what's the best way for them to get in touch with
There's a contact link on our simplysweetgames.ca website. I monitor that email, so I will for sure see it if they send me a note.
you? Perfect. Well, thank you again so much for both your kind words and being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Carl.
And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.